Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Francine Schertzer. Today we'll talk about Pennsylvania's budget impasse. But first, we're joined by Ed Mann, investigative reporter with Spotlight PA. You wrote about the difficulty that pharmacies are having in navigating competing guidelines regarding the COVID vaccine. Can you explain, first of all, the new guidelines that were established from the FDA?
Sure. The FDA, they approved COVID-19 vaccines, the boosters, essentially, in August. But what they did is they added new limitations on who should receive it. The big limitations that they put in was that for people 65 and older, you're still good to get a vaccine, pretty simple. But if you're under 65, you're supposed to have a qualifying health condition that puts you at severe risk for COVID-19 outcomes. And this is different from the past. In the past, it was pretty much everybody 6 months and older the FDA approved vaccines for. So it created a lot of confusion and concerns about who actually would qualify for a vaccine and who would know, who would be able to navigate this system.
Back in 2020, the Trump administration was credited with expediting and distributing the COVID vaccine. Why does it seem like the administration is now trying to limit access to this vaccine?
I think what they've said is that FDA officials have said that the evidence of the benefits of repeat boosters essentially is uncertain, and that this process would allow for generation of evidence. There's also Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he's the Health and Human Services Secretary, has a long record of being skeptical of vaccines or critical of vaccines, however you want to say it. But his position has been that to sort of end the emergency use portion of it. And obviously that is people have a lot of concerns about that.
How do these FDA guidelines compare with those coming from other medical authorities?
So they're different. The Pennsylvania, our Board of Pharmacy, and some other, and the Shapiro administration, they've urged officials in the state, patients in the state, to follow guidelines from three medical organizations. The American Academy of Family Physicians, they recommend vaccines, boosters for everyone 19 and older, regardless of whether you have an underlying health condition. The American Academy of Pediatrics, they recommend vaccines generally in more cases than the Trump administration has done. They say for 2-year-olds through 18, they recommend it for people with underlying conditions, but they also say parents should have an option to get their kids vaccinated if they want it. And then there's other organizations that have recommendations for people who are pregnant or lactating as well. How
do pharmacies determine which guidance they should be following?
In the past, it was pretty simple. There was a federal advisory committee to the CDC. That advisory committee made its recommendations, and the CDC typically just adopted them, and pharmacies would use those recommendations. It's in regulations that they can follow those recommendations, and so pharmacies now have to navigate which ones they're going to follow. And there's also the big question of where are they going to follow and what is insurance going to ultimately cover. And I think that's influencing sort of what we're seeing from pharmacies too, because the Pennsylvania Board of Pharmacy gave them more options. They gave them 3 different medical associations that they could follow for recommendations that have looser guidelines. When I was looking at the big pharmacy chains and some smaller independent ones, I was seeing they were all either explicitly following or seemed to be following, or their spokespeople said they were following the FDA more restrictive guidelines. And the big question is if that's going to change over the coming months, if they're going to ease up on those restrictions.
What are pharmacies saying about insurers' willingness to cover vaccines with these more restrictive guidelines coming from the federal government?
That's been really evolving over the past couple of weeks that we've been covering it. But I think right now what we've been hearing, I think especially there was a federal advisory, the CDC's committee for vaccine recommendations. They gave a recommendation that was, it's basically up to you as an individual to get a vaccine or not. But the fact that they left it up to you, some people see that as promising for in-insurance coverage, because that can have the strength of a recommendation essentially. And so for what I've been hearing generally from insurers and from pharmacists is that they believe most insurers are going to continue to cover the COVID-19 vaccines for this season. And the Shapiro administration put out information this week last week talking about how they've been actively working to ensure that's the case and indicating that they've had positive results from the insurance companies.
Can you talk about pharmacists' role in vaccine distribution?
Sure. I think we've seen COVID-19, there was a real effort to put pharmacists as a main source for distributing and administering vaccines. There was a choice that was made, through various policies that they were in a good position because they were easy. It's easier to access your pharmacy to stop in than it is to necessarily schedule an appointment with your physician or, your primary care provider. And so they've been a main source of both, flu vaccines and COVID-19 vaccines. They're commonly given at the same times because during the fall and winter, respiratory illnesses tend to rise. And so as a matter of convenience, they've become, the main face of vaccines in the country.
How have pharmacies in other states handled the change in the FDA vaccine regulations?
We've seen a lot of similar actions, especially in states with Democratic governors or Democratic administrations, taking actions similar to what Pennsylvania has done. Using whatever sort of regulatory or administrative power they have to, explicitly say you should follow these other associations or you should follow these organizations, and trying to leverage that power to ensure that there is insurance coverage for it.
Does conflicting recommendations affect the general public's impression of vaccines and their willingness to take them?
I mean, I think that's the concern I've heard from a number of medical professionals and pharmacists. And it's just confusing about whether you can actually get a vaccine or not. Because when you go to these pharmacy chains' websites, I was testing it out, and they were all, in general, asking if you have an underlying health condition. And so, even though the Shapiro administration has taken action to broaden access, that wasn't necessarily being the broadest access in the past few weeks. And so we'll see if that changes or not. But, if it starts being the idea that it's up to individual choices or not, that's very different than federal authorities recommending this. And that one of the concerns I heard from, the chief medical officer for the American Academy of Family Physicians is that very issue that, this is making it more complicated than it needs to be.
Ed Mann joins us from Spotlight, PA. Thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks so much.
More of the PCN Capitol Preview after this short break. Welcome back. Our guests today are TJ Rooney, Senior Partner at Rooney Novak Isenhour Group, and Kevin Harley, Managing Director at Quantum Communications. The state budget is now 3 months past due. Kevin, we'll start with you. What is the status of negotiations?
Well, I think right now there's a little bit of a standoff, Francine. The Senate Republicans basically want the governor to come down on his number. He's not quite willing to do that yet. So that's kind of where things are. This is now, I think, day 88 or day 89, something like that. And you're starting now to feel the pinch from the counties with their social services and also with school districts. So the pressure, I think, is starting to mount. I don't think the general public is really aware of it because it doesn't affect them in their day-to-day lives. But I think the pressure is mounting, and hopefully we'll get something done. I was optimistic that maybe by the end of September, but maybe we'll still get there, although I think we're looking at least October, maybe mid-October at this point.
TJ, can you talk a little bit more about who's currently being impacted by the impasse?
Well, as Kevin mentioned, and he's exactly right, the effects of the late budget are starting to take hold in our counties and in our school districts. Fulton County, just to name a few, have already announced potential layoffs as a result of the budget impasse. And school districts are literally facing hundreds of millions of dollars in lapsed payments. So Kevin's right. I don't think the general public has yet to feel the effects. But the other thing I would just add to this all, Francine, is we're looking at a potential federal government shutdown. And the unfortunate reality is that the people who are most adversely affected by both a budget impasse and a federal government shutdown are the same people. And they happen to be the people who are least able to withstand such double whammy. So we're about $1 billion apart, as Kevin suggested, but it's we're not there yet.
Are lawmakers feeling an impetus to get this budget done?
Well, Francine, I'm just going to take off my partisan cap for a minute and just talk about reality. Nobody wins in these situations. And I'm not so sure that everybody in the world understands that. The way the general public views this is the pox on everybody's house. So there are no political winners. There are only losers in situations such as this. I think, somebody who drives the train and gets the job done may be given some credit, but at this moment in time, like I said, it's sort of a pox on everybody's house.
Yeah, I agree with TJ on that. I mean, one of the constitutional requirements of the General Assembly and the governor is to get a budget done on time by June 30th. I mean, they have a whole year to work on it, and certainly you can have disagreements, which you're going to have. Even if you have all one party in charge, you're going to have a lot of disagreements on the budget. But when you have divided government like we have in Pennsylvania now, I don't know why they can't start this process much earlier and have these fights in June and work it out by the 30th. I think it is. I agree with TJ. It's something that you take an oath to uphold the Pennsylvania Constitution. You should get the budget done on time.
Kevin, you served as communications director to Governor Tom Corbett. Can you talk a little bit about the tone you're hearing from these budget negotiations and perhaps the tone or the messaging that the caucuses and the governor's office send out while the negotiations are going on?
Sure, and a lot of it depends. When Governor Corbett was governor, we had both a Republican House and a Republican Senate. So it was a little bit different. We kind of kept things, believe me, there were a lot of pounding on the table and people weren't always happy with each other. But we kind of kept that in-house a little bit more so because we're all the same party. When you have divided government, people are going to use that for political points. And I think it's naive to say that you have to, that politics does not drive a lot of the budget decisions. You certainly have different policy differences, but, certainly the Republicans don't want to give Governor Shapiro a victory or setting him up for re-election or, potentially a presidential run. And likewise, the House Democrats and Governor Shapiro don't want to give a victory to the Republicans. But that's what, when you have divided government, you've got to compromise. Compromise is oftentimes a bad word in politics, but certainly when it comes to budget negotiations, I think that is kind of the coin of the realm. You have to give and take. And certainly I think Shapiro understands this. I mean, he came in with a 7.5% increase over last year's spending. I don't think anybody seriously thought that was his number, but for the most part, he's sticking to his guns at this point. So I think what you'll eventually see, hopefully, is the Senate Republicans coming up a little bit, where they have come in around 47, which is basically last year's number, and Governor Shapiro and the House Democrats coming down. And then, I don't know what that number is going to be. My guess, if I had to guess, is it'll be just under $50 billion. I think the Senate Republicans, for whatever reason, don't want to cross that $50 billion threshold. I don't think it means anything to the average Pennsylvanian, but at least internally it may.
TJ, can you talk a little bit about the importance of coming to agreement on a spend number?
No, absolutely. But before I do, there are a lot of people over the course of time in Harrisburg who understand things like Kevin just articulated very, very well. And one of those people happens to be somebody with whom Kevin is very, very well acquainted and associated, and that's our mutual dear friend Charlie Giroux. Charlie Giroux is the CEO of Quantum Communications, Kevin's shop, and Charlie, over the course of some time, has faced some health setbacks, and he's back on his pegs, and he's back at home, and he's back to his old stuff. So yes, the budget is something that guys like Charlie Giroux and Kevin know a whole lot about, know how to get it done. The number, I mean, that is the crux of it. You have to agree on a number, and that is proven to be quite problematic. The other thing that we've seen in this budget are a number of big ticket items kind of taken off the table, if you will. In the governor's original budget, it called for medical marijuana proceeds to legalize marijuana. That obviously didn't come to pass. SEPTA and mass transit funding writ large was a huge impediment to the budget. That's been laid on the table for a bit. And so too have skill games. Skill games are a very, very confounding and perplexing issue for the General Assembly and for a lot of other people. That was another source of big revenue potentially that has, again, been laid on the tables. So the number, I think Kevin's absolutely right. That 50 billion number is probably right or very close. The Senate, as Kevin said, was at 47.6. in August. The governor was at 51.5 in February, and the House passed the bill at $50.6 billion in July. So, we're not that far away. My sincere hope is that in my family's home country, Ireland, that the governor and the Senate president might have had an opportunity to talk over the weekend while the Steelers were distinguishing themselves in the Emerald Isle. So my hope is that the cool heads will prevail. They will understand that we cannot afford both the double whammy of a government shutdown and a budget impasse when the fix is within our reach.
TJ, since Kevin just referred a moment ago to whether or not there's politics involved, do you think there's any credence to the theory that the budget is being delayed to hurt the governor politically, in particular, delaying his ability to announce his run for re-election?
I get it, Francine, and it's almost too easy. I don't think that. I know these people. I know Kim Ward and Joe Pittman, and yes, they have a political role to play, and they take their roles very, very seriously. But they take governing more seriously. And the truth of the matter is, a delayed budget in the grand scheme of things as it relates to a presidential campaign would be nothing less than small potatoes. So I have a lot more faith. And this is coming from a partisan Democrat. I have faith in Kim Ward and Joe Pittman and the leadership on all sides of the equation to put that kind of stuff aside. Because again, there's no winners in this whole impasse. There's very, very little political gain to be gotten by holding the governor's budget hostage. So I think they understand that. And I'm quite sure that that's not what's driving this impasse.
I'd like to talk also about the issue of geography. In particular, the Senate Republicans mainly hail from southwestern PA. The House Democrats in leadership are from southeastern PA. Does geography play a role in what gets negotiated?
That's a really interesting observation, Francine. I actually think it probably does, maybe more than maybe subconsciously even. Let's just take the SEPTA funding, which TJ mentioned. So SEPTA in southeastern Pennsylvania is just, it's very, very drives the economy in many instances. Well, the rest of the state doesn't have anything even close to SEPTA. So when you have the entire, including the governor from southeastern Pennsylvania, they have a different mindset on that. And the rest of the, many Republicans in rural parts of the state, I think other than maybe Jay Costa, everybody else is from, I believe, basically the southeast except for the lieutenant governor. So they have maybe a different mindset of SEPTA than the other leadership in the Senate does. So I do think it probably plays into that a little bit. It's like, well, tell SEPTA to get their act together, and maybe we'll fund them more. SEPTA should get their act together, and then maybe we can fund them. We can't continually be bailing out SEPTA. And of course, as TJ mentioned, the SEPTA situation has been somewhat resolved. The Senate Republicans will say, well, we came up with the idea of basically using trust fund or operation funds to get us over this funding crisis. And the governor rejected that, and now, over the last couple of weeks has kind of come around to the Senate Republicans' proposal, which, by the way, I give the governor credit for doing that, saying, hey, let's get this issue resolved. So I do think there is something to that. Maybe, if you're a Senate Republican leader, you have to look at the whole state as well, but they certainly do have parochial interests as well.
TJ, why do you think that transportation was such a significant issue earlier in the budget?
You mean mass transit?
Yes.
Well, again, I think Kevin articulated a lot of the reasons. You have a core from the Southeast for whom that is really a daily issue that they're confronted with. And then you have people from more rural parts of Pennsylvania who perhaps have never ridden on a city bus or a subway train or a train of any consequence. So it's hard. There's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of misperceptions, and some truth to the notion that we've got to do better managing finances. But there are also a lot of ideas that people have who are not familiar with the role that SEPTA plays and the incredibly important function that it plays in everyday lives of Pennsylvanians in the Southeast. So overcoming some of these ideas and misperceptions that SEPTA is just the big black hole is part of the equation. I've always thought that it would be a great idea for the transportation committees, have bicameral transportation committees meet and ride buses and trains for a day. Just, again, not to be a Weisenheimer, but just for people to have a better familiarity, because I think with a better understanding comes an increased familiarity. So, Francine, it's like the age-old problem. Like, nobody wants to raise revenue for anything, and sure as heck don't want to raise revenue for things that they're unfamiliar with or think that, inherently think that is a waste of money. There's a lot of education that can be where members can benefit from having a better understanding, and that applies both ways. I mean, I always love the fact that Sharif Street and his father, Mayor Street, used to go to farms on weekends because Mayor Street had such an incredibly long history with farming and growing up. So I think those things are important for members to get out of their zones, as you were talking to Kevin about, get out of the parochial areas in which they live, travel the state, and see what's actually going on and how it affects people's lives.
House Democrats were initially pushing for a more reoccurring type of mass transit funding. Do you think that caucus will be satisfied with the resolution, the 2-year funding plan for SEPTA, or do you think they'll continue to push for something that's more sustainable?
So yes, they're going to. I think they will be very content with for the next year or two. The governor's content, so that would presuppose that his colleagues in the legislature would be content. But to Kevin's earlier point about budgeting and why, it'd be a great opportunity now, I think, is to take advantage of these 2 years to really start to dig in, to really start to come up with a workable solution that can win support in all 4 caucuses. So when this day and time comes, and this day and time will come 2 years from now, we won't be having the same conversation. We will talk about instead how we took advantage of the blessing of time to be able to put together not a workaround, but something that works long term. And there's probably a lot of hope and wishing and praying in my thought, but that's my thought at the moment.
Yeah, a moment ago in the program, TJ had referred to some of the other new revenues that the governor had proposed back in February, one of them being skills games.
Right.
I just want to revisit that briefly. For the benefit of viewers, can you differentiate the difference between skills games versus the casino games that are already established?
Yes, I am not an expert on really either of them, but I will give you a quick overview. So it's my understanding that as opposed to like the slot machines, which the casinos operate, skill games are not regulated currently in Pennsylvania, and the idea is that unlike a video poker, which is just pure chance, there's some skill that it's either a quiz or trivia or something like that. So currently they're not taxed or regulated, and so Senator Yaws had a bill over the last several years that would tax them, I believe, at around 15%, and they would be regulated by the Department of Revenue. Shapiro came in with in his budget proposal, I think around 50%, which is what the slots are currently taxed at, and that they would be regulated by the Gaming Control Board. And then the Senate Republicans came up, Senator Gephardt came up with kind of a in-between, I think it was 30-some%, and also regulated by the Gaming Control Board. That, for whatever reason, lots of lobbying going back and forth, a lot of grassroots effort, it seems to be dead at the moment. So that revenue source that the governor and obviously Senate Republicans were looking at seems to be off the table for now. So to what TJ had mentioned is the governor had proposed, 3 major spending proposals, and SEPTA being one, legalizing marijuana being the other, and then skill games. And there appears, from what Majority Leader Pittman has said, that there's no appetite in his caucus at this time to advance legalizing marijuana. So the 2 of the 3 big ticket items are off the table. One, SEPTA costing money, but then 2 revenue generators, skill games and legalizing marijuana, are off the table, which means you've got to come down on your number to try to get a budget done, and which is part of the reason why we're sitting here today without a budget after 88 or 89 days.
TJ, do you think that?
Francine,
yeah, go ahead, please.
For a guy who didn't know much, Kevin did a great job explaining it. And just another thing I want to add to that. It's been in some circles categorized as a mean-spirited way to target fraternal organizations and clubs and things like that. That is certainly not what the intent of the legislation is. And I'll give you an example. I had occasion last week to be having a conversation with my dear friend and colleague, Donna Oberlander, who's recently retired from the General Assembly, the House of Representatives, after a distinguished terms in office and service and leadership. And we with people from the city of Philadelphia, from the Commerce Department. We were talking about this issue. And the commonality is that what we've seen in Pennsylvania is a proliferation of these sort of like illegal gaming emporiums that pop up in vacant retail spaces. And all of a sudden they stand up these sort of like mini casinos. And, if you're concerned about the social detriments of casinos writ large, you ought to be really, really concerned with the idea of these sort of mini pop-up unregulated casinos taking hold. And it's not just in urban areas. I mean, Donna was recanting a story about how in Clinton County these things are popping up. So there's more to it. There's more to the issue than just trying to grab some dough and pick at nits. This has become a real problem, not just in urban Pennsylvania, but all over Pennsylvania. And for people, especially for people with gaming, with problems generally involving gambling, these things are like your worst nightmare come true.
TJ, you served in the General Assembly for a number of years. How involved are the average rank and file members in the budget process, and how informed are they as negotiations are going on?
I served in the General Assembly for 118 years, and just look at me. I used to be 6'8" and blonde. So how not as much as most members would like to think. And it's logical. It's practical. It's understandable. You can't have 102 people in a room. I don't care if they are all dressed the same, look the same. They're not going to agree on everything. So the notion of listen. The members give input to their leaders, as well they should. That input comes from their constituency, and they verbalize those concerns to their leaders. Their leaders factor those things. As Kevin referred to, he's exactly right. There are political calculuses and equations in the art of governing. So that's the way it needs to be. So because you can't. I served on an airport authority. There was 19 members. The first thing we did was cut it to 11 because nobody could agree on lunch. So that's the idea, and that's the way it works. The leaders negotiate the budget, but they do so armed with inputted information that they get from their members who get that from their constituents. So democracy works perfectly when we let it. A lot of times people want to, get in the way of negotiations. There are stunts. We've seen them. We've seen them play out in this budget season. Stunts that are designed to, they're as bad, they're egregious. They're nothing more than stunts designed to draw voters' attention away from the real problems. So let the leaders lead, let them negotiate, and that's the way it should be. And Francine, that's the way it is. If anybody says they're running on a platform, I'm going to go to Harrisburg and I'm going to bust down the door and get into those, they're not. So just let the system work the way it's intended, and it can work very well. We've shown that previously.
We'll continue our discussion in just a moment, but first let's give our guests a brief break while we look at what PCN is covering this week. On tomorrow's PCN Capitol Preview, the topic will be data centers. We'll be joined by Amy Britton from the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry and Rob Altenberg, Senior Director of Energy and Climate with Penn Future. They'll join us Tuesday morning live at 9 o'clock. On the Issues has the first in our series featuring candidates in November's general election. Dan Miller, a Democrat running on the Republican ballot for mayor of Harrisburg, starts us off. He'll be here Wednesday at 7 p.m. Right after that, we'll turn from the election to the recent elimination of federal tax credits for clean energy projects. Flora Codoni from Penn Environment will explain Wednesday at 7:30. Journalists Roundtable will have John Finnerty from Capitol Wire State Affairs, Aaliyah Schneider from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Justin Schweitzer of City and State PA. Journalists Roundtable airs Thursdays at 7 p.m. Now on to the history and culture side of PCN's programming. The Art of Andy Warhol will be explained Tuesday at 8 o'clock. Hear about the experience of Civil War soldiers who fought at Antietam Sunday at 2 p.m. PA Books will have author Brady Kreitzer tell us about his book, The Whiskey Rebellion, on Sunday at 7 o'clock. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free online. Check out our streaming service, PCNSelect.com. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers like you. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Now let's return to our discussion about the state budget. Kevin, Harley, can you kind of give us the perspective? What's it like to be at the negotiating table with the administration and the legislative leaders?
Well, it's interesting. As TJ had mentioned earlier, the hardest thing to come to in a budget negotiation is the spend number. Okay, and I used to say that on June, this is when we did budgets on time under Corbett. Things look awfully different on June 1st than they do the last week in June, right? So people will say things and, it gets a little crazy. And then, you get the leaders, as TJ mentioned, you get the governor, his budget secretary, his legislative director, and then you get the leaders of the caucuses. Typically, it's just your negotiation, in our case, was with the Senate Majority Leader and the Pro Tem and the House Speaker, because we were all the same party. If you're in the minority party, you occasionally will come into a meeting, but you really don't have a whole lot of say in what's happening. You just kind of have to take it. And but once you get to that spend number, that's really, really important, because then the rest of the budget kind of just flows. I mean, there's a lot of staff work and things like that, but then you can divide it up after that. But that spend numbers is so important, and that's where we haven't come to with this budget. The governor, starts out at, I think, 51.6 or something. The House Democrats passed about $1 billion lower, and the Senate Republicans are basically using last year's number. So, once they get to that number, the rest of the budget should come together, maybe within a week or so, that the members can vote on it. But those negotiations, back to your original point, they can become very, very heated. And that's why they're oftentimes good to be done in private. I think it was the Vince Fumo, I think, once said, who was the Senate Majority or Appropriations Chair, said, until somebody storms out of a meeting, is pounding on the table and storms out of a meeting, you don't really have a budget negotiation. So there's some truth to that, by the way.
How does this year's budget impasse compare to some past budget impasses of perhaps prior administrations that you've both lived through?
Well, one of the things that, and TJ can comment on this because he lived through it as a member of the General Assembly, the pressure to get this done is not nearly as great as it used to be, because under Rendell, his first budget was kind of bifurcated. We didn't get the education spending done until almost December, okay? But the rest of the budget was done. But then the union went to Commonwealth Court, and was eventually upheld by the state Supreme Court, that state employees have to be paid. So it used to be that if you were a state employee, you didn't get paid when there was a budget impasse. So, every member has state employees, but particularly here in central Pennsylvania, where there's a lot of state employees, and it was very Republican at the time, there was a lot of pressure on those members telling their leadership, hey, I might not win next year if you don't get this budget done. So there was a lot of pressure to get the budget done on time, because state employees did not get paid. And that pressure, or that leverage, is gone now. So that's why, we were saying the average Pennsylvania isn't aware. But back then, everybody maybe had a relative or a neighbor or somebody that was a state employee that was affected or impacted greatly by not getting a paycheck. So the pressure's really gone. That Supreme Court case was probably good for state employees, but maybe not so good in getting a budget done on time.
TJ?
No, it's 100% right. I mean, people forget, but in the 70s, the 80s, up to the very early 90s, when there was a budget impasse, Kevin's right, it was state employees, but also those men and women and children who received public benefits. So yes. It was, any time that would occur, beginning on July 1st, there would be people literally camping out in the hallways of the Capitol, literally for days and weeks until a budget. So yes, the pressure has been relieved by the courts. Whether or not that was actually a favor, that I certainly understand it, but Kevin, when he suggests that maybe that was the beginning of the end of on-time budgets, that is very, very, very much true.
Yeah. Over the last, I think, 25 budgets, I think it's either 13 or 14 of them have been late budgets. So we have a lot of late budgets in Pennsylvania. It's just it's become normal, and I think that's a bad thing. I think they should get these budgets done on time, and you're starting to see the impact of it as we've talked about with schools and social services.
TJ,
we are one of three states that finds ourselves with this sort of divided legislative and gubernatorial situation. I'm not making excuses, but I mean you can understand, I think, a delay to a point. But we also have the thing I don't think we've talked yet mentioned is the rainy day fund.
Right. We
have a rather replete rainy day fund, and if we're talking about listen, I don't want to sound like Thurston Howell the third, but if we're talking about $1 billion, this is not an insurmountable problem. And again, not to be a heartbeat, but going back to this notion of a federal government shutdown, if it's only going to cost us $1 billion to dig ourselves out of this ditch while they play their games, I'd be all for it.
The governor's original budget proposal called for using $1.6 billion of that rainy day fund. TJ, can you talk a little bit more about maybe the benefits and drawbacks of touching that fund?
Well, I mean, it's sort of, I don't want to say, I don't mean it in any way, shape, or form to insult you, but it's sort of obvious. It's sort of like your family savings account. Is it really, really that bad? I mean, it's almost like the pile of money of last resort, because, if you just are at wit's end and you can't find any other way out of the conundrum, then you have to resort to savings. You want to save those things as long as you can, so when the rain really comes in, you're well positioned. But in a case like this, I do think there's some extenuating circumstances with the federal shutdown looming that would give some heightened credibility to the notion of using $8 billion. I mean, if that's the number, again, we're not agreed on the spend, but say it's $1 billion, I would use that yesterday to plug this hole, and just get this over with, and let's look to tomorrow.
Yeah, it's funny, Francine. When Governor Corbett took office, we were coming on the heels of the Great Recession. So when he took office, the rainy day fund had $22 million in it. So it wasn't like we could tap into the rainy day fund. Rendell had raided it. So by the time he left, I think it was up to close to $400 million. Now, I think it was 7.6. It's down to $6 million now, I think, or somewhere around there. And we have a pretty healthy rainy day fund in Pennsylvania. I think we can fund the government for about up to 50 days. But there are restrictions on how you can spend the rainy day fund. Basically, it has to be an emergency, or there's these certain restrictions, and you need you need a supermajority to spend it. At a certain level. And I think we're not there. If there is a federal government shutdown, I think that could be the reason to go into and spend the rainy day fund. Maybe not at the levels that Shapiro wants, but I think the Republicans would perhaps be more willing to do that if there is a federal government shutdown without a budget on the federal government. But there's lots of debates on what that level of the rainy day fund should be. The advantage of having a lot of money in the rainy day fund, like we currently have in Pennsylvania, is that it helps your credit rating. So that brings down the borrowing interest rates that we have to spend, and that helps all Pennsylvanians. So there's kind of pros and cons to having a lot of money in the rainy day fund. Certainly, if you're the governor, you want to be able to use that rainy day fund in lieu of raising taxes. If you're the state treasurer or if you're the legislature, you kind of want to keep building up that nest egg. So it is very political in how you would spend that money.
I'd like to talk briefly about education funding. The governor's original budget proposal included $526 million in adequacy payments. This is in response to a Commonwealth Court decision calling for fairer school funding amongst all districts. Can the state afford to keep including these adequacy payments in its budgets?
Well,
TJ, your signal's breaking up for just a moment, so I'm going to come back to you. Kevin, I'd like to pose the same question to you. Can the state afford to continue to include these adequacy payments in the state budgets?
Well, it's interesting. You're talking about the fair funding formula and the Commonwealth Court case. I think the Republicans have said, they opposed went to court to block it, but they didn't appeal it to the state Supreme Court, so they've accepted that. So it's just a matter of how quickly, over how many years will the fair funding formula take effect. But I should also say that I think it's been at least the last 14 years or 15 years that we've had every year is a record for education spending in Pennsylvania. This would be another record. Last year was a record. This would be another record. And education funding is extremely important. Republicans, the Governor Wolf and now Shapiro take a victory lap on that. But the Republicans were partners in that. Maybe they didn't want to spend quite as much, but they passed all those budgets because we either had a majority of both the House and the Senate, but we certainly had Senate majority in all of those budgets for the record spending on education. So what that number is going to be this year is certainly part of the budget negotiations. But I think education funding is important. I do think that Republicans will say, I think we're about 9th in the nation in terms of per pupil spending right now, but we don't always see the results of that in the classroom and in testing and high school graduation rates and college entrance acceptance. So, if we spend the money, we need to see some results for that as well.
TJ, I apologize. Your signal had broken up for just a moment, so I'm going to give you another crack at the same question. Can the state afford to continue to include these adequacy payments in their state budgets?
Yeah, I apologize. I'm in North Carolina this morning, and I think the Fujiyama effect of the two hurricanes is kind of screwing with the internet. Francine, I don't think that the legislature has a whole lot of choice in the matter. I mean, the court has been very, very forceful in handing down their opinion, and barring some sort of intervention or some sort of reversal of the position of the courts, then it would appear that it would be a line item that the legislature will contend with ad infinitum.
Another facet of education funding, the governor had proposed a base tuition rate for cyber charter schools of roughly $8,000 per student. Have you heard much discussion about that, or do you see any potential for that to be included in a budget?
Francine, I'd be telling you an untruth if I suggested that I was that far into the weeds and where they are with that program. So I defer.
Yeah, I think that I'm with TJ. I'm not that familiar with it, other than I think some of the cyber charter folks have said that is a number that is unsustainable for them, because cyber charters do provide a very, very important educational role for our children. Kids who learn a little bit differently, who may have been bullied, who may have learning disabilities, or are very gifted students take advantage of that. And if you just look at over the last couple of years, the unbelievable growth of cyber charter schools, homeschools. It's been phenomenal. A lot of it was post-COVID because parents had to, see what was going on with their children's education, and decided that, maybe they didn't want them in public schools. So, cyber charters are public schools. So I think they play an important role in our children's education and should be adequately funded. What that number is, with TJ, I'm not an expert on that, so I wouldn't venture to say what the number should be.
One other perennial issue within education that seems to come up frequently is that of school vouchers. Do you foresee any scenario where Governor Shapiro would approve school vouchers within a state budget?
Well, we'll have to see. I think, that was a whole issue, obviously, going back to his campaign when he ran for governor, said he was for it, and then in the first budget, withdrew his support for vouchers. I think that is a kind of a black mark on his administration, particularly him. And I don't know if we'll see that, with the House being Democratic run. I don't know that you'll see an increase in vouchers. It's a bipartisan issue, but in the big beautiful bill that was passed, there's some federal vouchers, so that may they're tax credits, so that may impact and help Pennsylvania students who want to take advantage of that, or parents who want to take advantage of that for their children.
TJ, would you like to comment on school vouchers as well?
No, I maybe part company a little bit with my friend Kevin in the sense that it wouldn't surprise me at some point, maybe not in the next couple of weeks, but before the end of the governor's term, I would be almost surprised if there wasn't sort of some movement in a different direction, more in favor of extending parents' options and choices in the schooling of their children. I don't know what form or fashion it would take. I don't think it would look like or be called something like we've grown accustomed to in Pennsylvania, straight up vouchers. But I think there's something there that the governor might be inclined to engage in ideas in a little bit different from the way we've done things in the past.
We currently have a divided legislature. Does that make it easier or harder for the governor to get his initiatives through and to negotiate a budget?
It depends. I mean, Kevin referenced the fact that they had it all and still face challenges internally because, in spite of the fact that they may be all of one party, they're not ever all of one mind. But when you lop on top of that, the partisan divide in the chamber itself, it makes it that much more difficult. It's not easy. I know people say, well, if it were that easy, everybody would do it. And so it's, yes, divided government brings about special challenges.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it certainly does. And you have to be willing to, the budget's a three-legged stool, right? You've got the Senate, the House, and the governor. And each of them have to compromise somewhat to get a budget done, particularly in a divided government. So it's a lot of give and take. And when you have one side that doesn't seem willing to give too much, which I think we are seeing with the governor, doesn't want to come off his spend number, you get this long delay. So, the governor understands where the Senate Republicans are coming from. So he has to know that they're only going to go up to a certain, they're going to come off their 47, and they already have 47 billion. But, the governor had to know that when he proposed a 7.5% increase. There was no way that he knew that the Senate Republicans were going to go for that number. So there's got to be compromise, and particularly in a divided government. And when one side's not willing to do that, which I do think is what we're seeing right now, you're going to get a long delay.
I'd like to thank my guest, TJ Rooney, Senior Partner at Rooney, Novak, Isenhour Group, and Kevin Harley, Managing Director of Quantum Communications. Gentlemen, thank you both for your time. PCN recently spoke with Senator Rosemary Brown about her legislation involving midwives.
Welcome to our program. A bill you proposed involving midwives was recently approved by the Senate Consumer Protection and Professional Licensure Committee. What does that bill say?
Well, this is a really important bill for Pennsylvanians, and especially families, moms, babies, because this is about ensuring that we have maternal health care. This is about ensuring when a woman is having a child that there is access to quality care for the maternal process. So it's during pregnancy, it's before pregnancy, after pregnancy, and then also baby care for up to 28 days for a newborn infant. So this bill is modernizing midwifery. And we hear midwifery and we think 1800s and something that maybe just the mind goes to, a very antiquated type of care. But this is top-notch care. This is care that's all-inclusive, very comprehensive for a woman, baby, and family. And this is going to give more midwives availability to practice in Pennsylvania, essentially from the bill.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between a certified nurse midwife and a regular midwife?
Great. And that is something that I think we're all getting more educated on in the legislature and even in society. A certified nurse midwife is a midwife who was a nurse before. So you just break it down, very certified nurse midwife. The certified midwife has gone through the same exact midwifery school training, and with this bill, the certification as a nurse midwife, but they were not nurses prior. They have gone through schooling, they have at least a bachelor's degree, then they have some other prerequisites that they have to meet before they go into the midwifery school. But they take the same exact training, same schooling as a midwife who was a nurse prior. So we're looking to have a nurse midwife who practices currently, the certified nurse midwife, and we are looking to certify and have them approved the regular midwife, certified midwife. So it gets a little confusing, but we have certified nurse midwives that practice now. We are looking to get certified midwives out there and practicing, and they have the same schooling and the same board certification as a nurse midwife.
What led you to propose this bill?
So, it is a tough subject. I think it was something that was brought to my attention when I was a state representative 5 years ago. And it really caught my attention because I have a pharmaceutical background, healthcare background, and I understand, the needs that come up. And not only that, I'm a mother of 3 and understand, the needs that we have as women. And I think the comprehensive approach to the midwife was really nice to see, the modernization of how we are helping women during their process of having children. And they're already tremendous partners to our OBGYN doctors. And we're at a shortage. We're at a shortage for OBGYNs. We're at a shortage for healthcare providers. And we needed to do something. And I think that this partnership was already there with our certified nurse midwives. So why not have our certified midwives be able to practice, be able to give additional benefit to so many women and families?
Your colleague, Senator Michelle Brooks, voted no on this bill out of concern that certified midwives don't have the same training as certified nurse midwives. How did you respond to that?
I thought that, that's something that automatically everyone thinks, well, if you weren't a nurse prior, how can you do this? And there's definitely different experiences that come from anybody that does something first and then does something second. I mean, you could look at the legislative body. We all have different backgrounds. We all come from, somebody's a teacher, somebody has a business background, somebody's been a police officer, and then we come in and then we all become legislators. And we all bring something to the table. Now, sciences are a little different, but what I think Senator Brooks brought up was her concern still on that. But we do need to clarify and make sure the legislators know and the public knows that, as I said prior, they may not have been a nurse before, but they usually have a bachelor's in science. And if they don't have a bachelor's in science, they actually will have prerequisites on those different classifications of sciences, psychology, maternal care, before they can even be accepted into the midwifery school. But at the end of the day, both populations of the midwives go through the same midwifery school and take the same exam. And so at the end of the day, their qualifications are the same, and they bring different assets to the job as we do in the legislature. And I think the other piece that's important to know is that the Medical Society of Pennsylvania supports this legislation, and so does the Hospital Association of Pennsylvania. And that was a very hard endeavor to get to. And I think we have done a great job with this legislation. And, when they're on board, they have the confidence that we have.
Lastly, where is this bill in the legislative process currently?
So we passed it out with one negative vote out of the Professional Licensure Committee in the Senate, and I'm expecting it to hit the Senate floor very shortly when we return. And I'm getting great vibes and great communication from the House of Representatives that they are looking forward to seeing this bill. So I do hope this will end up on the governor's desk and we will see our certified midwives able to practice in Pennsylvania.
Senator Rosemary Brown, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That concludes today's show. The PCN Capitol Preview returns tomorrow to discuss data centers. Amy Britton from the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry and Rob Attenberg from Senior Director of the Energy and Climate with Penn Future join us tomorrow live at 9 a.m. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thank you for watching.